Hello and welcome to Sunset Television. I am Akhilesh Suman and you are watching a special report on India's foreign policy projections for the year 2023 and also a recap of how India's diplomatic maneuverings define 2022. World will not be the same in 2023 as it was in 2022, 21, 20 or 2019. The year 2022 had witnessed global recovery from the ravages of COVID pandemic, but it also had to come to terms with Russia-Ukraine war. India too was impacted by the impending fallout, but devised ways to avoid any crippling impact to its economy or global outreach.
The year 2023 certainly needs a nucleus to weave a narrative of peace and growth. A narrative which will encourage cessation of Russia-Ukraine war and cement India's role in the global affairs.
G20 India 2023. One Earth, one family, one future.
In 2023, India also has the challenging task to work as G20 president. In this pivotal role, it will lead the efforts to counter economic slowdown and stimulate global recovery post-COVID-19 pandemic.
India was a lucky country in a way, but also I think our leadership took some prudent steps. And we were able to deal with the pandemic much better than would have been possible if the prudent policies were not in place. Russia-Ukraine war created an unprecedented challenge for Indian foreign policy because we were expected to take sides. And India took a principled position, and it took a position which was in its own national interest, but also a position which was, I think, echoed in various parts of the world, namely that the war should end through dialogue and diplomacy, and that this was not an era of war.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of SCO summit in 2022 also brought hope for peace. President Putin's response to PM Modi's appeal for suspension of hostilities between Russia and Ukraine is being seen by the experts as a robust step in the right direction. In the meeting, President Putin was attentive to the observations made by PM Modi. He elucidated his viewpoint and the threat posed by NATO to Russian territorial and strategic interests. According to experts, the SCO interaction between the two world leaders may see dilution of extreme positions and cessation of hostilities in 2023.
According to President Putin and also Foreign Minister Lavrov of the US, they have accused the West of saying that you are fighting the war to put an end to the Russia itself. So Russia sees it as an existential war. So I think those are very hardline positions right now.
India, as G20 president, is also expected to create platforms for consultation with different stakeholders. It has the necessary heft now to weed out impasse and acrimony linked to war in Ukraine at previous G20 meetings.
2023 will see two important summits that India will host of G20 and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. So this will be the year of double presidencies for India. It will be a year of extraordinary diplomacy by India, and I can say that my research leads me to assert that this may be a year of a mix of some uncertainty, some turbulence, but hopefully noticeable diplomatic triumph for India with the successful holding of these two presidencies.
India had acquired the G20 presidency from Indonesia on November 17, 2022. In the Bali summit and assumed the presidency from 1st of December 2022. Therefore, its biggest diplomatic outreach will pivot around G20 in 2023. The formal summit will be held in September in New Delhi. India plans to organize 200 formal meetings in 2023 under the G20 banner. These meetings will be cushioned by numerous informal interactions on bilateral and multilateral fora.
G20 presidency also gives a golden opportunity to India to convince the world with its spectacle vision of decentralizing the world economy and production chain. The idea is to create a secure and evolved globe mirrored in the multipolarity and rationalized balance of power.
India looks at the G20 presidency to promote global cooperation beyond ideological or prosperity divides. In 2023, India will project its evolved global leadership capabilities, matured economic vision, and the voice of South among the Committee of the Nations.
G20, as we know, is reflecting all the polarizations and fissures and disunity of the world into itself. So as president or as the chair, it will be India's duty and India's challenge to reconcile and take everybody together. If we succeed in that, it can really be seen potentially as a historic presidency.
India will also use the G20 presidency to boost its candidature for a permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council. The year 2022 put India's independent foreign policy under stress. The world was divided by the Russia-Ukraine war. India decided not to support the war launched by Russia, but also refrained from taking positions articulated by the Western nations. India used its independent purse to condemn the incidents of mass killing in Bucha, ostensibly at the behest of Russian forces. In 2023, India is seen by the global community as a messenger of peace. In 2022, India largely followed an independent foreign policy, akin to non-alignment. The key words defining this policy were dialogue and diplomacy. Later, India chose to explain its new position and why it was necessary to carve an independent path. External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar travelled to America, Europe and Middle East, while his junior ministers Meenakshi Lekhi, Rajkumar Singh and V. Muralidharan were sent to Latin America and Africa to articulate the canons of dialogue and diplomacy and why aligning with one group or the other should be avoided.
For India, it was an uphill task in the year 2022 to balance between the sharply divided positions taken by the USA, Europe, Japan, South Korea and all the G7 members pertaining to the Russia-Ukraine war. In the year 2023, India will be ready to lead the peace efforts on this critical issue.
India's position on this issue was vindicated by the end of the year 2022. Presidents from both the warring nations were sending feelers to Prime Minister Modi. President Putin called on 16th of December 2022, followed by a call by the Ukrainian president. Both the leaders discussed the issues related to war apart from the G20 presidency. President Zelensky specifically requested Prime Minister Modi to take forward the spirit of the Bali G20 summit in resolving the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Amidst the divide entailed by Russia-Ukraine, India decided to follow its national interest to address the impact of ensuing food and energy crisis. This crisis was midwifed by the supply chain problems and sanctions against Russia. India bought oil and gas from Russia to safeguard its energy needs. While the purchase of oil and gas may continue in 2023 from Russia, India will also try to boost exports to both Russia and Ukraine. The idea is to ensure trade balance between Russia and India, especially as India continues to import military equipment and oil from the former.
In this situation, our relations with Russia are going to be tricky, difficult, because we really have to somehow preserve our relationship with Russia, because we have a dependency on Russia in terms of arms procurement. It was 46% in the last 3 years ending 2021. 46% of our arms came from Russia. Now that has gone down from 60 plus to 46, but still very high. The USA was 12%, increasing steadily, and the USA has made good public statements saying that we were not willing to be your partners in military technology earlier, but we are now willing to be partners, and we understand that you are dependent on Russia, and we understand why you have taken the stand you have taken therefore on the Ukraine war. So putting it all together, unless the US gives us something very meaningful, for example, nuclear submarine propulsion technology, I have read in the public domain, I don't know, that the Russians gave us some help regarding the nuclear reactor for our nuclear submarine, Ariane submarine. So the US has not given anything like that.
During the ensuing energy security issue, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar chose to tick off the Western nations for their hypocritical behavior with India. He reminded them about how India's fuel consumption was minuscule in their comparison. He also prized open some moments from posterity that revealed Western countries' support to Pakistan and refusal of weapons supply that India needed at that critical juncture. India used this opportunity to flag the importance of an independent foreign policy and its relevance. The evolution of India's foreign policy, its transparency and dynamism was appreciated by none other than US President Joe Biden.
The year 2023 also marks India taking over the presidency of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. India's chair will focus on SECURE, that stands for Security for Citizens, Economic Development, Connectivity in the Region, Unity among Nations, Respect for Sovereignty and Integrity, and Environment Protection.
SCO has 8 members: Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, India, and Pakistan. India has its task cut out in this grouping. It requires a balance between the presence of China and Pakistan during the summit and the region.
In Eurasia, over the last 20 years or so, the Chinese influence has grown quite significantly. So it is important that for us to have a holistic approach to our security, we must not neglect Eurasia. And in that context, Shanghai Cooperation Organization becomes an important forum for us, where not only do we project our concerns, but also shape the agenda by bringing in a huge developmental experience that we have, and the benefit of that experience to the other countries.
Despite differences over Russia-Ukraine war, India and UK deciding to have a free trade agreement was a good starting point in 2022. In the year 2023, the FTA may materialize on the lines of UAE and Australia FTAs. India also plans to go ahead with free trade agreements with EU, Gulf Cooperation Council and Canada in 2023. These steps will usher in huge platforms for exports of goods and deepening diplomatic ties.
Europe is a very interesting case because we are trying very hard to improve relations with the UK, as the UK is also trying very hard, because after Brexit they are looking for new partners.
In the South Asian neighborhood in 2022, India extended a helping hand in the time of crisis. Sri Lanka got maximum help when its economy tanked. India gave about $4 billion in assistance, including credit lines, a currency swap arrangement and deferred import payments. India also sent essential drugs for the island's 22 million population. In 2023, India plans to invest around $1 billion in the beleaguered Sri Lankan economy. The idea is to reduce its dependence on China.
First of all, it doesn't really depend on India, it depends on China, Japan, others who are holding back their bilateral promises for restructuring of the debt package of Sri Lanka. I think once they come on board, India will also come on board, is likely to come on board. But at the same time, I think there is a whole list of issues, how to further deepen economic and trade cooperation, how to get some of the older projects get off the line, and also how to establish a proper political cooperation and communication between the leaders. All this will engage our attention. I think 2023 hopefully will be the year when Sri Lanka's recovery begins properly.
In 2022, India's ties with Bangladesh, Maldives and Bhutan remain stable. In 2023, the focus may remain on growth. However, it will be interesting to see which way the ties with Nepal may head with Pushpa Dahal as the new PM.
Today, Nepal, I think last year, Nepal bought something like about 700-800 crore rupees. Supplied 700-800 crore rupees worth of electricity to India. So Nepal is now becoming a net supplier of electricity to India. So very recently we had some discussions with some Nepali businessmen. They are looking at supplying 10,000 megawatts of electricity by the end of this decade. So they have realized how important India is for, because electricity, hydroelectricity is a massive source from which Nepal can gain. So I think even all these governments now understand politics is one, but connectivity, economic relationship, people-to-people relationship need to be maintained, because this brings stability to the neighborhoods as well as for India. So I'm quite hopeful that there is of course a change of government, but once they would look at their interests, they would come out in favor of a deeper economic cooperation with India.
Maintaining ties with China remains a challenge for the government in 2023 too. Chinese President Xi Jinping may visit India twice in 2023, once at the G20 summit and the other at the SCO summit. These events provide an opportunity to PM Modi to discuss some important bilateral issues. Experts see some way forward on issues related to trade, while keeping fingers crossed on the border issue. Though China does continue to face internal challenges from a groaning economy and COVID explosion.
China's policy towards India is not going to change fundamentally, or I think even substantially, whereas Pakistan's policy towards India will be open outward hostility, but not a great capacity to hurt India unless they act in concert with China. And that's the big question. Will the two countries act in concert? We have to assume that they will and hope that they will not. By assumptions, I mean we have to be prepared militarily, politically, diplomatically and strategically for what is called a 2.5 front war, or at least a 2-front war, or at least a limited war.
We have tried very hard in the past to work closely with China, and I think that option is not ruled out. But at the same time, we would have to await some improvement in China's behavior towards India and towards other countries to be able to get that cooperation going on with them.
Despite differences on issues related to Russia-Ukraine war, India-US ties moved pragmatically during 2022. In 2022, India joined the US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, though it refrained from joining the trade arm of the forum, as most of the IPEF members are also the members of China-led RCEP, and it may have spiked chances of dumping of goods. India and US have much more to work on in 2023. Both the nations plan to boost cooperation in the Quad.
Quad should take up some security dimension as well. Although there are a few like cyber security, etc. But China, Quad should be an instrument to deter China, even though it is not an alliance. So it is important to develop the security dimension of Quad. Of course, Quad is not the only game in the town. There is also AUKUS, which is very clearly a security alliance. There's also now agreement between Japan and Australia. There is also a security agreement. There is also a trilateral between Australia, Japan, and the US, which also has security overtones. So if China becomes more assertive, probably the Quad will also move in that direction.
On December 31st, 2022, India's non-permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council ended. During its 2-year tenure, India twice assumed the presidency of UNSC with focus on reformed multilateralism and counter-terrorism. India also pushed climate change issues.
On counter-terrorism, India organized a No Money for Terror conference in New Delhi in 2022 and a UNSC Counter-Terror Committee meeting to stop access of new and emerging technologies to the terrorists. In year 2023, India plans further push for zero tolerance towards terror financing through G20 and SCO groupings.
Brazil in Latin America witnessed new leadership. In place of President Bolsonaro, Lula da Silva takes charge in the new year to work with Brazil in 2023 for the cause of Global South as well as for better coordination in BRICS and IBSA. Oil and mineral-rich Venezuela too is eager to deepen ties with India, but it is also facing sanctions. India may have to work with West on this issue in 2023.
I think India-Latin America trade has been on increase, and I also agree with you when you point out to the re-emergence of President Lula in Brazil. He proved himself last time to be a world leader with a global vision. You remember in his time, IBSA was set up and BRICS really took the momentum, and he also developed very close relations with Africa and also certain Asian powers. So, and eventually now after India, he will be the president of G20. So, I'm quite optimistic that the Latin American component in India's diplomatic exchanges and in foreign policy work would enhance in 2023, and of course, it will be a great pleasure, I'm sure, for India to welcome President Lula in this country in September.
India also plans to engage and deepen ties with African nations to counter the Chinese incursions there. India-Africa Forum Summit is one such platform that seeks to energize and promote group dialogues and stabilize India's foray in the region.
African Union, which is representing 54 countries, is still only a permanent guest in G20. I think if G20 wants to reflect the power realities of the world today, the political realities of the world today, then it is my considered view that they should be upgraded from a permanent guest to a permanent member. I think this will provide a very decent balance between the European Union and the African Union.
In recent times, India has worked well in the Middle East nations. In 2023, it will have a chance to strengthen them individually as well as group-wise. OIC and GCC among groups and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman remain the focus area. 2023 may also see India giving momentum to groupings like I2U2 that consist of India, Israel, USA and UAE. In Israel, the new tenure of Premier Benjamin Netanyahu will further boost the ties between India and Israel. Iran will be yet another major country with which India would have to reinvent redefine its relationship, keeping in mind the sanctions imposed on it by the Western nations. Iran remains a bridge between India and Central Asia via Chabahar port.
We already know that the President of Egypt has been invited to be the special guest. It's a very prudent and wise choice. I think it underlines, first of all, the importance and the potential in the relationship between India and Egypt. It's also a strong signal to the Arab world that it remains relevant and important for India.
And finally, to ensure a healthy diet for the world, India is celebrating the International Year of Millets. It will give a boost to consumption and exports of the coarse grain worldwide, with India acquiring center stage.
And now we are at the end of the report, with the caveat that the new spike in the COVID cases recently in some countries will be controlled and contained locally. The year 2023 benignly smiles at India. The years of toils and sacrifice may come to fruition soon. India will have ample of chance to showcase its sincerity and prowess in peacemaking and becoming the voice of the South on the global fora, with an eager world looking forward to follow the path embedded in the spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Akhilesh Suman for Sansad TV.